peanut M&M stuff
Okay.
and scones and all of that stuff. So really, this is probably
You're streaming now.
so much healthier for us all, really. Okay. Thank you, Caitlin, for taking care of that. Really appreciate it. All right,
Absolutely.
then. I think we are ready to go now. So re-entering the panel discussion, we are looking at reviewing the group, which is just one organization this year, of small budget organizations that pay their artists. And that is Apiri Anamam. And we're looking to Emily to start the conversation. Thank you.
Okay. This is a Milwaukee-based group. It's a relatively new organization. They've been in existence for about 5 years, but they only incorporated in 2018. They have a very clear mission, vision, high artistic aspirations. They focus primarily on a cappella early music of the Renaissance, but with a specific contemporary interpretation that appeals to a wider audience than might be expected of an early music group. They, during the shutdown, they had streaming and virtual events, and also hosted a panel discussion on challenges facing classical musicians of color. Their artistic director, along with the ensemble artists board and staff, work collaboratively in creating their programs. They do not have specific K-12 educational activities, but the group has wide appeal to all ages, and their collaborative programs have included elements not normally seen, which include visual, literary, and other artistic areas, along with mindfulness and a spiritual aesthetic. They're a small organization, and their programming is at a level that is high above what their size might suggest. Their founding artistic director and the succeeding director have been very charismatic, along with their talented group of vocal artists. They have partnered with the Milwaukee Opera Theater, and they are the resident ensemble at All Saints Cathedral. They are primarily composed of young emerging artists, and this group gives them the opportunity to learn and perform this unique genre of vocal music in a highly trained atmosphere, giving them rare professional experience at an early stage in their careers. It's a very fresh group. Audiences have been small but have grown, and they are intent upon ensuring their long-term existence through developing their internal structures. They meet monthly, they plan, they have surveys, and a lot of social media presence.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panel for your thoughts and comments. And thank you, Emily.
I'll jump in. I think I would just, I echo everything that Emily just said. For a relatively new organization, I thought this was a really good application. Again, like we have with some of the other applicants, I'd encourage them to share a little bit more details with survey results from kind of like what they're hearing from their audiences and for their participants.
Thank you. And whether they share that within the narrative or in support materials or whatever, you would have just liked to have that info.
Yes.
Lori, Kevin, Brandon?
I'll just add one of the comments they made is because they're a younger group, they don't yet have a statewide or local network, and they reference Wisconsin Arts Board as supporting them to activate this. So it seems like through their narrative, they're requesting some support with that.
And some previous conversations. Yeah, thank you. Great. Yeah, Kevin.
I like this group a lot. I did find the narrative a little lacking in detail in places. Like I thought they could have taken a next step and provided us more information, particularly around benefit to the community. I did like their organizational plan. I thought it was a good plan particularly for an organization of this size.
Yeah, I thought their plan was good for their size. Again, they're super hyper focused, and it's really kind of hard to judge, in terms of where do they fit with other organizations. And again, I think that actually plays to them as a great strength. I would have loved to have heard more about that in their narrative.
Thank you.
One other comment I had made in a different section was just their organizational plan. I really appreciated the detail and that it was actually tied to budget and accountability. It was one of the only ones I saw where there was actually a connection to the budget lines and holding different positions or roles accountable.
Thank you. All right. If there are no other comments, then please go ahead and score. Thank you, Dale. All right. Next, we move into the mid-sized budget organizations with those that pay their artists. And the first up is the Racine Symphony Orchestra Association. And that would be you, Jillian.
So Symphony Orchestra. Oops. You guys hearing me okay? I'm getting feedback here. There we go. Okay. So the RSO has been in effect for over 90 years? I think it was established in 1932. And they've had the same music director for the last 25 years. Community orchestra, of amateur musicians and volunteers. They become a professional orchestra and they pay their staff. Typically, they do 2 to 3 masterwork concerts a year, 2 pops concerts, a holiday concert, and also educational concerts throughout the year. Administrative staff, I think they said they had 7 pre-pandemic and currently have 5 now that they're paying. And 8 members of the board who meet monthly, as well as an executive committee. I think the RSO, from their musical sample, they are a high quality Orchestra. I think they bring a lot to their community. They did a good job moving to online performances they did this for free for their audience. They also did online concerts for the community outreach that they do. They have a lot of community support and sponsorships. Looking through their budget, I mean, looks like a pretty solid budget, I thought. They maintained really well through the pandemic, it looks like. Have a lot of community partners. UW Parkside was mentioned, and a lot of the area high schools. They participate in artist in residence programs. Again, with virtual concerts that they were developing, and also course material for teachers, which I thought was very good.
2 minutes.
Evaluating their programs through surveys, had a really good strategic plan. Things that I thought could have strengthened this. In the beginning of, again, in this application, they talked about their changing community and how their demographics are changing. It would have been nice to see a little bit of information about a plan of how they plan to address those changes and how they plan to reach these new audience members. So, and I will stop there.
All right, thank you. Then if we could please move to you, Lori. And you're muted.
There we go. I concur with everything that was said, and I was actually trying to see if there was anything additional in my notes. I think one piece of data that I compared was they talked about the estimated total streaming audience being 4,000 people. So I looked back at their 18-19 impact, and they serve about 5,000 in person. So they were able to reach nearly 80%, not knowing if it's the same, demographic, but I think their ability to continue engaging during the pandemic was to be commended. And also to reiterate just the support they gave to the schools, which it was a critical need for music educators, and seeing organizations that really supported with resources and materials was really important.
Thank you. All right, other comments from other panelists?
I think they mentioned, remember if it was in the narrative or in one of the attached documents, that they're maybe starting or in the middle of a new strategic planning process and are involving the Racine Community Foundation and the school district in that, which I thought was great, like really embracing their role as a member of the community and getting some of these other groups, important community groups, in as part of their strategic planning process.
Thank you. Emily or Brandon, anything to add to the mix? No? All right. Then please go ahead and score. Thank you, Dale. All right, next we have present music. And Kevin, you are the lead on this one.
Okay, so Present Music is a Milwaukee-based new music ensemble. dedicated performance education and commissioning. They were founded in 1982. They've commissioned more than 65 works in their history, including a number of works by Wisconsin composers. They have 7 core ensemble members, but engage 45 artists for their performances. They perform in a wide range of styles, so they really are looking at all different kinds of new music. They are bringing in new artistic directors at a very inopportune time, but they seem to have done it very well. They moved in the 1920 season from, they were able to have 4 in-person concerts and 5 online, which they did for free. Still brought in a lot of guest artists, jazz vocalists, a Native American singing and drumming group. They even worked with local drag queens from Milwaukee. They again did all online performances in 2021, but they moved to paid performances that year. So they did 4 free online performances, 7 paid. So they were still able to generate some earned revenue. Again, lots of great partnerships, including with a high school choir. They also engaged a lot of filmmakers to produce some really high quality videos for those concerts. They've commissioned 3 new works for their 40th anniversary season. They don't have a dedicated performance space, but they perform in various venues around Milwaukee, which they really consider a benefit as a way to reach different audiences. They've recently created a new production and marketing manager position and a new development manager position. They're looking to add a music librarian and production coordinator and education manager. So they are expanding their staff. Like a lot of organizations, they've had significant revenue decreases the last couple of years, but they have managed to run surpluses. This was a narrative where I would have liked a little more budget explanation. Their revenue mix is highly dependent on contributed income, but again, I think that's probably due to COVID and the lack of performance opportunity. Seem to carry a small cash reserve. They've made a commitment to center music by composers of color and women in their program. They bring composers to schools, which is great. They attract good sized audiences to their programming. They're planning on continuing to do streaming. So they've learned that they can use technology to reach some more audiences, and are going to continue to do that. They didn't address how they really make their programming decisions or take into account community impact. I would have liked to have seen something more than ticket sales, how they're really evaluating who their audiences are or what they're interested in. But overall, I thought a strong proposal.
Thank you, Kevin. Jillian.
I echo a lot of what Kevin just said. I was kind of like, yep, you kept ticking things off my list that I was going to comment on. But again, I think this was a good proposal. I would have liked to have seen, like Kevin said, more details in their financials. Because it was kind of like, who were their financial partners? Was it all just individual donations? That was a little unclear to me. So I would have liked to see more in that. And again, just overall, there were just a couple of sections, again, that I'd say just adding some more details about survey results, who's coming to your performances, who's in your, who's the audience that you're reaching. You're talking about you're being in all these different venues and the different audiences that you can reach, but it would be nice to know, like, in what venues and what audience do you reach when you do these different performances?
A little more demographic based on the venue. Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Emily, Brandon, Lori?
Related to their contributed income, they do have some large grants that have come through UPAF and then some large individual donors. So that was detailed in their 990, I think. And their audience sort of finds them. I mean, the audience follows them wherever they go. And I think that it's like their audience and their artistic, their artists are just imaginative and they sort of complement each other, I think. So, but they've maintained a very loyal base of supporters over the years and a good solid audience. And I think they're reaching new ones too.
Thank you.
Again, looking at this organization, like one of the other rooms earlier, super hyper focused organization that again, that I was craving to know more, and it took me a lot of time, like, not to convince myself to go outside and explore things, on my own. But they're almost there. Just like, I wanted more demographics of who's coming, who's following them. Does venues make a difference? What future partnerships that they're exploring, and specifically, exactly, I think someone mentioned this earlier. How is the audience reacting to these commissions? I mean, you have 60 new commissions. Is there an appetite for this? What are people saying about this? I think they have a great story to tell. It wasn't being told really well in the narrative.
All right, Lauren.
I think what I would just add as a concrete example is their strategic operational plan document that was attached is highly narrative, and it was hard to get through because it was a lot of words like numerous or expanding, but there wasn't the data piece. And so if they can just quantify some of what they're saying in narrative, it'd be easier to understand, and I think would also get to what a lot of people are saying about just wanting to know more.
Thank you all. Anything else to add? Okay, then please go ahead and score. Thank you, Dale. All right, next we come to Belcanto Chorus of Milwaukee. And Emily, that is you. Yep, we'll take a minute.
Okay. The Belcanto Chorus is a chorus of long standing in Milwaukee, and they present 4 concerts, very high quality in a typical year. It's a little on the high side for a community organization, but and they often present more than one performance. They're presented in several locations that have been chosen. They choose their locations because the spaces are acoustically appropriate for their purposes. Their primary outreach is the Belcanto senior singers, which are held in 4 senior communities around town, and these activities do support their mission of connecting singers, audience, and community through choral singing and inspiring a culture of communal singing. They were particularly creative in the pandemic and with their virtual programming, and when it was allowed, to having socially distanced and masked programming. The artistic director and board of directors are involved in the planning and evaluation of programs following a rubric that tracks benchmarks on their strategic plan. The managing director and the board of directors track the budget, cash flow, and operations. The longevity and stability of the chorus are important factors in their ability to present quality programming. The managing director has created financial and operational stability.
2 minutes.
As I mentioned, the senior communities are their primary partnerships. They do present 2 of their concerts at the Basilica of St. Josaphat, which brings their audience to that community in South Milwaukee. Their organization is financially stable and they manage their resources appropriately, with a balanced income stream derived from grants, donations, concert revenue, as well as membership fees to a lesser degree. They feel that their organization has literally changed and saved lives due to the singing and the emotional support that they and their audiences share. They are aware that their patron base does not reflect the diversity of the wider region, and they hope to be able to address this through long-term strategic planning. They have recently begun working with Imagine Milwaukee, or MKE, to better network and communicate the value of the arts. Surveys, they do surveys and they have a comprehensive marketing plan. Well, that's pretty much it from me.
All righty, great. Then I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the rest of the panel for your comments.
Okay. I wrote that they had, good, their financial management looked to be very stable. Programming was able to adjust to Zoom sessions for their senior members. I would echo what Emily said. They definitely had a focus on the mental health of their members as well as their senior community. Definitely caring about the whole person. The only thing that I would say for the next time that they apply is there were a lot of bulleted questions, and I wasn't sure if that was they reached out for help in areas and, you know, maybe were given the questions and then they decided to answer the questions in their narrative, or how that worked. But I would probably just, you know, little less bullets, more narrative with the details would be helpful.
You mean they included the question that we asked them to respond to in the narrative and took the space that they could have used? So we do ask them to include the high, the sort of high piece, so that it kind of grounds you in the question, as you know from all the others. But apparently they took that to mean, and also the bulleted breakdown pieces.
Yeah, because like I'm looking at the narrative and it was like, how many administrative staff people do you have on your payroll pre-COVID and after? And then there's the answer. And then how many board members, advisory committee members, and then the answer. And so it was just kind of like, you didn't need to conclude the questions necessarily for us. But I can understand, again, like when you're doing the application, that's probably the easiest way to do it. So.
you would have liked to have had that space devoted to a few more details. Is what
Yes.
I'm taking from that. Okay, thank you. All righty. Other comments from other panelists?
I think I'll just reiterate what it was really beautiful about this is the attention to the singer as a human being, as a social emotional person navigating, and the power of music really stood out in their application.
Thank you.
I liked, they were one of few organizations, I think, that talked about, gave specific examples of how they used feedback to affect their programming, which I think is really, really helpful to see.
Anything to add, Brandon? All righty. Then please go ahead and score. Thank you, Dale. All right. Next, we move to Midsummer's Music in Sister Bay. And Jillian, if you would start us off, that would be great.
So Midsummer Music, located in Sister Bay up in Door County, normally produces about 40 concerts in the summer season. They have an resident string quartet, the Griffin String Quartet, that performs between September and May, and they are the primary educational outreach. All the musicians are paid. The Griffin Quartet are paid musicians. They've had 3 administrative staff members pre-pandemic and currently now have 4. 16-member board and 3 additional advisory committee members that meet quarterly. So switching to my notes here. I think it was, they had a lot of high quality performances. Organization had a strong ties to the community, recruit top musicians for their programs, which I thought was very good. They did a good job moving to programming with similar struggles to we've seen with other organizations, but they found a way to connect with their patrons. Solid financial management, looked like a variety of funding sources, and a very active board and high quality staff members, I thought as well. Again, with this group, they do a lot with their local YMCA. They do a lot with their senior rehab centers in the area. I didn't see a lot of information on future plans and future goals. This would probably be, again, another one of those where it wasn't necessarily in the narrative, but kind of had to hunt a little bit to find things in other supportive materials. So I would I know they conducted surveys with their teachers and their students on their programs. But a lot of that feedback, again, I would say add that in to give us some more detail of how your programming and stuff really impacted your community and these students. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. All right, let's turn to Brandon.
You know, it's always nice to read about the summer during winter in the Northwest. So, I thought that again, echoing Julian's points, great, that the narrative lacked detail about the audiences they serve each season, both the summer as well as the year-round programs. And certainly like to have heard more about exactly who they're serving. Is it locals? Is it tourists? Exactly, what they bring in. They talked a lot about they serve the community, but again, I want to know who's showing up here. The strategic plan document that was great, had metrics, which is wonderful. But what lacked to me is like really no strategies and what might be able to be delivered by it. I would like to see but at least 2 or 3 strategies with every goal. Again, they had metrics, but really not how you're going to be getting to there. I thought one of the best things that they had, the organization cited 85,000 views on its virtual program, which is huge. And so that tells me that obviously the community is very connected and very interested in this. Global reach was definitely important. But again, going back to my first comment, would love to see, in reference to, who they serve in a usual year, how does 85,000 feel like? Is it more locals versus global audiences, tourists, et cetera? Overall, I enjoyed the artistic products. I thought there was great representation. Again, I thought that what they were able to do this past year was wonderful.
Thank you. All right. Other thoughts from other panelists?
To echo something Brendan said about the organizational plan they presented, I thought there was a lot of good information in it, but I did think it read in many places more like a series of tactics than sort of broader strategies or even goals in places, which is like something they could probably get some help with. To think about that as a more forward-looking document.
Thank you. Lori, Emily, any thoughts to add to the mix?
I guess the only other thing I'll comment on is budget. Their budget was interesting. There was just the one sentence talking about how they took a double draw, but the size of their budget is really bouncing all over the place. So it's just more of an observation. I mean, they still are keeping expenses below revenue, but it was an interesting 3-year look at their expenses.
All right. If that is all, then please go ahead and score. Thank you, Dale. Okay, now we turn to the final grouping within this mix, and that is the large budget organizations that pay their artists. And first up here is the Fox Valley Symphony Orchestra Association in Appleton. And Brandon, we turn to you for this one.
Great. So the Fox Valley Symphony Orchestra, founded more than 50 years ago, currently serves more than 1,200 adults and children each season through their concert and outreach activities. Of course, in March 2020, the organization began to shift, as many did throughout the pandemic, to thinking, actually, this wasn't more about the short term, it was more about the long term. And they started thinking about this, what if this isn't just a 1, 2, 3 month issue? What if this is longer? Deeply dedicated to music education, and that's where they sort of started their new vision for the year, starting with the idea of music for everyone, and really turned it into the central pulse, I think, for the organization for the 2020-21 season. They worked with students all the way up to seniors, and really focused on those individuals where isolation could be filled with some music. Virtual methods were utilized with collecting students with special needs and senior centers. They found the virtual pathways to keep connected with participants, especially through the Link Up program out of Carnegie Hall, with a direct concert from Carnegie Hall to itself for these students. They had one performance in spring of 2021 with a chamber group that was presented at a local church. Again, I think what really sung to me in the proposal is they really were able to leverage their music education, and the contributions and sponsorships really propelled them where no earned income was available. I love that the financials looked strong. Their 3-year history shows a lot of stability. And again, I think even with the PPP loan, again, really puts them in good financial footing. They prioritized the special needs students as an audience, and organized, again, 4 program sites and had 32 sessions there. Again, an opportunity by an organization to say, if we're not performing and doing traditional concerts, what else can we do to serve our community?
2 minutes.
Yeah, I think that their direct feedback from musicians and from educators is really important. All the things that have a strong survey, and really enjoyed the strategic plan. I thought, again, everything was well composed, achievable, metrics were great. The only thing I would say that it was a little too long, and I was just concerned to bullet it down to some bullet points to be able to be easily digestible for future content. But I just loved how this organization took and leaned into the pandemic.
Those final comments were related to the strategic plan, Brandon?
Yes.
Got it, thank you. Okay. Great. Alrighty, moving then to Kevin.
Yeah, I echo all of what Brandon said. I really like the way, I think as you phrased it, they leaned into the pandemic, and I particularly like that they shifted a lot of their focus to their outreach program. I think they said they knew that a lot of those groups, students, people with disabilities, people in care homes would be particularly hit hard by isolation, and they focused on that part of their programming, which I thought was great, and just a really, really thoughtful, community-focused, caring way to approach the situation. They've also been building some capacity. They noted they've hired a new conductor, an executive director for their youth orchestra. One question I had, they noted in their application they'd lost their director of development and that fundraising duties had been absorbed by the ED. I don't know if that's permanent or temporary. I would hope it's temporary and that they're planning on filling that position. They also noted that they were able to maintain contributed revenue despite their lack of audiences during the pandemic, which is just a great sign that they're well supported by the community.
Thank you. All right, opening it up to Jillian and Lori and Emily.
I think I would just add, there was so much resilience throughout this entire application. And one of the things that stood out to me was the role they played in their own community, that amplifier signal, and working with many other nonprofits. And I think, during this time, everyone was working so hard to keep their own nonprofits viable and serving their constituents, but looking to that larger community and working together was also a powerful part of their application.
Thank you.
I agree with everything that's been said. I was particularly impressed with their social connection emphasis. I think it was really important for their audiences and their and youth in their area to avoid that isolation.
Thank you.
I think it's all been said. Very strong proposal, and yeah, they really did a great job of leaning in.
Thank you. All right, then. Please go ahead and score these. Thanks, Dale. All righty. Next up is the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra based in Madison. And Jillian, that's you.
Here we go. All right, Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra. Regularly presented 3 performances, a holiday concert, spring concert. They had added this midwinter, smaller kind of chamber concert to their performance offerings. Paid staff, their artistic director and collaborative pianist were paid per performances and for rehearsals. 9-member board of the director. They've got choir members represented on their board. The board had numerous meetings and did a lot of chats and things via email and Zoom. High quality offerings that they get. Traditional classical music. I think the organization did a good job with their online performances again and reaching their audiences. Stable financials from their board. It looked like a lot of strong community support and partnerships with local businesses and a lot of sponsorship. Very talented and dedicated staff. Just looking through their personnel rosters there. Community outreach consisted of free concerts. As we all know, performances on the square in the summer attracts a huge audience and a lot of tourism to Madison and to the state. Provided families in the Madison area free lessons through the different school districts and the local community partners.
2 minutes.
Sorry, going through my notes here. I thought they had a good organizational plan, and their strategic plan laid out very nicely. They had clear goals. Again, strong commitment to their community, and they're doing some review to make sure that their impact on the community is very meaningful, which I thought was good. Just a very strong proposal. And I think they're doing a great job. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jillian. Great. All right, then I'm going to turn to Kevin.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jillian said. The only things I would add, I noted they began a composer in residence program in 2021, which is great. It looks like they've had a bit of staff turnover recently with what seems like maybe a ED transition. But I think Jillian's right. Like they have a good solid staff in place, a good size endowment for an organization of their size. I'm curious. I mean, I've been curious with a lot of organizations about budget, and it's hard to tell in like the world we're living in right now. There's just been so much fluctuation that I don't think was like from very large surpluses to very large deficits to surpluses. I think over the last 3 years, they've run a cumulative surplus, which is great, but I would have just liked a little more detail about what was going on there. But yeah, overall, I agree. It was a strong proposal.
So Kevin, just to make sure I'm clear, what you're saying is you'd love to have more information on why the budget fluctuations beyond the pandemic. I mean, there seems to be some other forces at play.
Yeah, no, I suspect that. And I mean, I think like this was maybe a conversation for afterward, because it was something I noticed with lots of applications, but it's hard to evaluate budgets given the last couple of years. But I think in general, organizations could do a better job of explaining deficits, surpluses, fluctuation. A lot of them kind of elide over that.
Yeah, let's talk about that at the end, because there's that box in the narrative that where they can and are asked to, if there's more than a 20% fluctuation, explain why. So thank you for calling that out. And it sounds like there's also, depending on the year, the organizations may be submitting, financials from 2016, 17, and 18, all pre-pandemic. So thank you. We'll make a note of that one. Okay, other comments from the panel on this application? Brandon shaking his head, nothing else to add? Okay.
I would just they did such an excellent job. They've covered the points.
Awesome. Great. Emily, same for you. All right. Awesome. Please score then. Thank you. Body language is so much harder to read via Zoom than in the room.
Sorry, and someone's also drilling above me, so I have to like occasionally mute the.
Awesome. That's helpful for focus. Thanks, Dale. Okay, so before we take on these last two applications, and Kevin's going to lead them, and Brandon's going to be the second reader on both of those. Sorry, guys, I usually try to mix it up a little better than that. But I'm going to just invite everybody to acknowledge that it's 2 o'clock and maybe take a stretch for a moment or something. You can turn your camera off if you want to, whatever. But I think it's an opportunity to just take a minute because you have been on a roll.
Yeah, we're shockingly ahead of a schedule right now.
I know. No, maybe it's easier to stay focused on Zoom than in a real in-person event, but I don't know. I don't know. All righty. When Susan comes back and Lori turns her camera on and Emily does, then I think we can start up again for these final two. All right, great. Thank you. All right, thanks everybody. On to the second to last, which is the Madison Symphony Orchestra based in Madison. And Kevin, please start us off.
Okay, the Madison Symphony Orchestra, founded in 1925, I believe, is the oldest continuously operating organization of its kind in the state of Wisconsin. John DeMaine celebrating his 27th season as the music director, so a long history and a lot of continuity at the Madison Symphony Orchestra. Their typical season includes 8 programs of 3 concerts each, featuring an array of guest artists. They do a Beyond the Score presentation, which features live educational programming along with a concert performance. And they have a 4-concert organ series, which is, I think it's very exciting and interesting. I like organ music. Typical audience of 45,000 for their concerts, 25,000 for education and community engagement events. They have 91 musicians paid on a per service basis, regularly bringing in world-class guest artists to Madison, Manuel X, Rachel Martin Pine, Pika Zuckerman, lots of top quality talent. Adjustments for COVID, they offered virtual concerts. They say their Christmas concert reached 9,000 people. They continued their young artist competition virtually, and continue with virtual education programs as a way to support teachers adjusting to COVID. Their programs reach a much larger audience through public radio and public television. Let's see. They have 12 full-time and 2 part-time staff. They were able to keep them all on board during COVID. They have a board of 90 that meets 6 times a year with additional committee meetings. They cite their very flexible business model as a strength with a part-time orchestra has allowed them to, particularly during COVID, to shift their programming. They have a pretty conservative management philosophy. So their board requires an operating reserve, 25% of annual expenses, and then they can only draw 25% of those in any given year. So they're always sort of keeping some money in reserve. They also keep a $30 million endowment, providing more stability. They offer a full suite of what you would expect when it comes to education, community engagement programs, things like school concerts, in-school programs for a variety of ages, community concerts. Of particular note is their Heartstrings music therapy program, which I wanted to call out in particular. Sorry, I'm having scrolling problems. There we go. They do online and print surveys of subscribers and ticket buyers, the standard formal education evaluation programs for their education. They created a strategic plan that they're working off of in 2019, which guides their annual planning. They've engaged multiple different firms to help create plans to identify, cultivate, and retain new audiences through what they describe as audience-centric programming and marketing with a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. You should note they've managed to maintain balanced budgets throughout COVID. Strong mix of earned and contributed revenue. Contributed revenue in particular has remained strong. I thought this was a particularly good proposal in sort of balancing what business as usual looks like versus how they've adapted during the pandemic. I think that's been a hard thing for a lot of. It's a hard thing to do in the space you have to sort of address both, and I thought they did a good job of it.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, Brandon, you're up.
There was a couple really great like gems from here from the proposal that I really highlighted. They talked about that the MSO is a revenue generator for downtown Madison economy, citing $31 spent on non-ticketed items. I as a numbers geek, I love that. I think that, again, it's wonderful to tell. You were talking about Heartstrings earlier. Again, it's a great program, wonderful program. And they even said that they really broke through that transportation barrier by really providing that program directly into the community instead of like having people come to them, which again, I think it's reflective of their forethought in their evaluation process to have a 5-year strategic plan that was created in 2019. Again, that they look at, here's the stuff for 5 years, and they go down to here's the annual stuff. And again, I thought was extremely well documented and extremely well written, composed. They've currently hired 2 consulting groups to build a comprehensive plan to build and retain new audiences, really with EDI as the forefront of that. And to call that out specifically, I thought that was wonderful. The whole proposal top to bottom was exceptional and didn't really leave me wanting to know anything more about the program other than how can I figure out economic spending in my own organization.
Well, we can talk about that. Thank you, Brandon. All righty. So Jillian, Emily, Lori.
I think I would just echo, I thought this was a really strong proposal. Like Brandon said, inspiring. It was just, again, I would probably say that this would definitely be another best practice for any arts organization to look at some of the wonderful programming and things that they're doing. And yeah, again, it was like, yeah, how can I do this? How can I have this kind of reach? How can I have this kind of impact?
Awesome.
Really well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Lori, anything to add?
Well, just because we're using the word gems, I think there were a few other ones that stood out to me. And I apologize if any of these were shared in a different way earlier, but like to me, one of the most significant ones was the commitment to continuing to pay the musicians through the pandemic. In the industry as a whole, I think where people were able to do that, it just sends a really strong message about value. And then, the other is just them understanding, and this would be one of those best practices too, the importance of being involved at the local, state, and national level when you're a larger organization. And they have several people who are serving in leadership roles during this time as well. And I think that's a really important piece, especially now as we all work to recover. So I commend them for not only taking care of their own organization, but really taking care of the greater network of people.
Thank you. All right, it sounds like that is enough discussion and you are ready to score. So please do that. Thank you, Dale. All right. And on to the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. Kevin, you again.
Okay, our last one today. Founded in 1959, this is Wisconsin's largest performing arts organization. 72 full-time professional musicians and 170 voice volunteer chorus under the direction of music director Ken David Masur and music director laureate Ido DeBart. They regularly bring in world-renowned guest artists and composers, have a wide range of partnerships with other arts organizations throughout the state. In a typical year, they produce 135 plus subscription concerts over a 40-week season, plus community concerts for a total audience of over 200,000, plus 400 students in K through 12 educational programs. They have pointed to a renewed emphasis on work by composers of color in their upcoming season. They're going to feature a program of work by living Black female composers, a program featuring the works of Chevalier de Saint-Georges, the Juneteenth program, works of the Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu. Specifically for COVID, they created digital programming that included a 26 episode programming. It was streamed over 28,000 times, pulling work out of the archives with commentary from the music director to keep people engaged. They also did a full performance of Nimrod, which they say was streamed over 320,000 times, so reaching just a very large audience with their streaming. They also took the opportunity to install a new HVAC ionization system in their hall. So building infrastructure that's going to benefit them going forward. They're governed by a 42-member board of directors, which includes 2 musicians and 7 representatives from Milwaukee City and County, which, based on my experience, is a lot of representatives from the government. They pointed to the board having 16 persons of color. They have also created committees on equity, diversity, and inclusion task force. Their staff has grown significantly from 45 to 64 with the opening of the Bradley Symphony Center, which is giving them a lot more control over their schedule, better tech, an education studio, and additional income for food and beverage rental. I think like a lot of large organizations with a lot of sunk costs, they had to furlough staff during the pandemic, and also put the orchestra on furlough 1 week earlier. They did note that they saw a significant drop in revenue and expenses because of COVID, but overall their financial position seems solid. They are currently in an endowment campaign looking to almost double their $23 million endowment, looking to add another $20 million to it. Very wide range of education programs, school concerts, in-school programs, youth competitions. They made their education programs fully digital. They actually, in doing so, were able to increase the number of schools served by those education programs by 200%. I thought this was a really interesting stat that they included. Their education program serves nearly 5% of the K through 8 population in the state of Wisconsin. So by virtue of working in the Milwaukee schools, are able to impact a very large number of students. As mentioned before, they have a new focus on works by underrepresented minority composers, and they want to use lessons learned during COVID to make digital works more accessible. They're also going to be launching a new education program for high school students with disabilities. They also talk about the impact they have economically on downtown Milwaukee, and have talked about developing collaborative place-based programming to reach other parts of the city. Lots of quantitative and qualitative feedback mechanisms, including surveys, interviews, focus groups with Milwaukee public school teachers that help inform their programming. I thought overall it was a strong application. I did note I would like some more information on the goals and strategies that are coming out of their diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and what they're trying to achieve and what their strategies are for achieving it.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, Brandon.
I could not imagine trying to open up a new home during the pandemic. So knowing this is delayed for a year, was I would say extremely important for them to get this done. But I think it allowed them to do a lot of good planning. They talked about really evaluating. They had a 5-year strategic plan. They worked with some promoting civil engagement and reducing barriers, important EDI training that was occurring. So I think they took the time that was given to them and focused it really well. As Kevin mentioned, I think a couple more goals. I mean, they have this great, very detailed, very organized, very graphical strategic plan. I think, again, having some more details in the EDI planning and what happened with the staff and musicians and the communities would have definitely gone on to help them. Again, being able to make adjustments. I mean, they did have to lay off some staff. They did, they had a week of furloughs for musicians, but then being able to, again, come back and really figure out their positions in terms of community and performances were excellent. Again, another strong proposal. I really think that, and we'll talk about this, I think, a little more afterwards. There's a couple more information that I would love to have had as part of this proposal process between this application and several others.
Yes, thank you for holding that. That's great. I mean, including it here. And all right, Emily, Lori, Jillian.
Great proposal.
Oh, sorry, Emily, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say great proposal, and they covered it excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, Lori.
Just because of the caliber of the proposal and the size of the organization, the strategic plan that's been mentioned, I think when I look at it, what's missing is the metrics and the clarity on the and so what, right? So what's not clear, there's a lot of steps within there where you can see the action, but so that action leads to what change. And some of it is needing to be inferred. And I think it'd be time well spent for them to go back through the strategic plan. And maybe those things are just very clear to them, but to make their thinking really transparent. And then how will they measure those items in the strategic plan? That just doing that would really strengthen it.
Just articulating that within the plan would really strengthen the plan.
It'd be a great start, because I think then to what end and what would ultimately change for the organization if those goals were met.
Thank you. Jillian, anything to add? Okay. All right, then. Thank you all. Please take a moment to score. And after you have scored, please go ahead and take another stretch break. Let us plan to convene. If you're okay with this, should we split the difference between 5 and 10 again and look at maybe 2:25? Does that seem reasonable? All right, lots of nodding heads. Thank you. Great. All right, so when you've submitted, go ahead and darken your camera if you wish and turn it back on at 2:25. Great. And Dale, you let me know when you've got everything all organized one way or the other, and we'll just start the evaluation conversation at 2:25, even if you don't have the scores ready for us to look at yet.
Okay. It looks like Lori darkened her camera, but I don't have her score yet.
Oh, okay. There she is.
I just hit submit, like as you were saying that, you should have.
Oh, okay.
Yes?
I see it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you, Lori. See you shortly. All right, see you shortly, Dale. Welcome back, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Just checking to see whether or not. Okay. Great. Okay. 2:24 and everybody's here. Holy cow, that's awesome. I think that this is a really great opportunity to take a moment and say thank you for all of the work that you clearly have put in over the past month in reviewing these applications. And in a moment, when Dale has it all sussed out, Dale, do you want to email me the list of scores? And then I can share it with everybody via email. We could take a moment. Actually, why don't we, if you wouldn't mind, maybe screen share? If you can
Okay.
share the whole list?
I
Does that
can
make
do that.
sense? Okay, let's do that. And then we'll see what you all have wrought, okay? And again, this is organized by averaging your scores. And so we'll give you a minute to maybe make that a little bit larger, Dale, and we'll give you all a minute to take a look at these 22
Does that help?
applications. Yes, thank you. Great. Now, of course, what this does not show is the list of scores that you have submitted for the small organizations, small budget organizations, but those that we focused on today. So yeah, having had a moment to scan through that, if you, let's see, just do this. Dale, if you wouldn't mind, are you guys, actually, would you just wave if you're ready for us to take that down and have a conversation now, or do you need another moment to, Kevin doesn't need to look at it anymore. Jillian's ready. Okay. Brandon, I've got a funny, you're fine. Emily, you're fine. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dale, for sharing that. Please stop. Okay. We'll get that to you to follow up as well, so you can look at it at greater leisure. Just wanted to have you see the results of your scoring and your work, and wonder if anything jumped out at you as you were looking at that list, or any surprises or anything. Okay. Good. And then I have a number of pieces have kind of popped up over the course of the day there, where we said, let's take a look at these in a little bit greater depth when we get to the end of the day and we do our evaluation piece. And if you have one of those that you would particularly like to bring up from the previous conversations, this would be an awesome time to do it. And I will start this piece by just sharing one that a question that I had even before we all met, and that is, does it make sense for us to consider making a 5-page limit for everyone? Because I will tell you that this year, especially the smaller, or so many, not all of them, so many of the small budget organizations really pushed back and said, you're asking us a lot of really good questions, and you're giving us 3 pages to do it and to respond to those questions within. And I heard you sort of throughout the day a number of times say, we really were looking for more information with some of this. And granted, those were mostly the mid-size and larger organizations, I think, that elicited those comments from you. But still, we'll ask the question. Small budget organization, likely in this, well, I won't say that part, but does it, given all that we ask, does it make sense to say, yes, you can have up to 5? You guys are the panelists. You've just reviewed a whole lot of information. Does it make sense to mitigate some of the questions or reduce some of the questions that we ask? I would love your feedback. And Kevin, you unmuted first, and then Emily, if you would share your thoughts, that would be great. Thanks, you two.
I don't want this to sound like overly negative, because I thought this was generally a pretty strong group of proposals.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, but here it comes. And I, like most of my career, I've been a grant writer, so I have opinions about this. I don't think the problem, at least for me, in ones where I said I think they needed to include more information, was that they didn't have enough room to include information. I think they didn't use the room they had effectively. Like I felt like there were a lot of applications, and some of this I hold out to, like, it's hard to answer questions about what you did during COVID, I recognize, but there was a lot of filler in a lot of these applications. We got a lot of, like, the strength of our organization is our amazing artists or whatever, which doesn't tell us a lot to make a judgment. So I think some encouragement to be more specific and concrete in their when they tell their stories would go a long way to at least meet the gaps I was seeing.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, I was going to say just that. It just it felt to me like they sort of used 10 words when 3 would do. I just felt like a lot of it needed to be simpler and more brief and more specific and more objective. And this came up when we were talking about measurable data. And, I know it's sometimes we don't always have the staff or the expertise to do this, but when you can when you can turn something into a picture, I think that's really good, like a graph or we looked at how many surveys did we look at? Well, we looked at no survey results. It was like there were no graphs that showed their audience responses. So yeah, I agree with Kevin, and I would have liked to. I kind of would get lost in the narrative, and so I had to kind of make my own brief summary as I was going along, and maybe that's what you have to do. I certainly am no expert in this, but that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. So it sounds like as we ask them to submit an example of one of their evaluation tools, we also need to say and pair it with the results that you have gleaned from that evaluation tool. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, Brandon. Or Julian.
All right. I think Kevin was alluding to this, and I think for me, I would have loved to have seen just a budget projection for the next year. Again, so many people talked about in their narrative about, hey, we have a surplus, we're going to use it next year. This is how we're going to do it. And looking backward is great, but having just a potential of what is going to be spent in the next year I think is really important, especially in the next 3 years with COVID. Because in my organization, we took about a 40% hit, but then now we're back to within 10% of where we're at this year. And again, I think being able to project that and seeing what has happened, I think is really an important tool. And also, so many people asked about, or at least provided stuff about EDI. I don't know how it's important to the Wisconsin State Arts Board, but having a specific question about that. I mean, the 2 grant panels I served on here in Minnesota had specific questions about some honestly too detailed, about exactly what populations you're serving, how are you connected to it, and everything else. But if it's really important, I think we should carve a space out for them to have think about this. Kevin talked about this earlier. I thought especially some of the smaller organizations didn't use the space well. I mean, to get basically cut and paste of season summaries, I didn't really need to know the past 3 seasons other than, that they occurred. Again, that might have been a great attachment, but not in the narrative. I felt I spent a lot of time scrolling down during, okay, that they had these concerts, this was the detail and everything else, where I could have just gotten to the heart of the matter about who they are right now rather than who they were 3 years ago.
So maybe something like we did, 7 performances or 7 productions in this year, see the attached season brochure to see what they were, moving on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar because I felt the same way as Brandon. It was just kind of like with all the seasons, it's great to know what, especially like with their programming, but some of these organizations had so much and that it was just like you said, it's like pages upon pages of what they've previously done, but nothing kind of concrete. I mean, like there was a little bit like, here's what we're doing now instead of what we've normally done. But, because I was even kind of like, give me the past season. That's really all I need. If you're a small organization, give me the last 2, that's fine. But I didn't need all of that. And again, it would have been great to have that in like the support materials to go and find.
So that's really helpful because right now we asked them to submit the last, I think, the most recent and the current season brochures as support material. But we say, what have you done in the last like 2.5, 3 seasons? And what I'm hearing you say is the last season is plenty for us to review and moving on. You don't really need that larger frame.
And if they want to provide highlights, that's great. But I don't need the entire concert.
Awesome.
I forgot who I'm trying to go through and who did it, but someone basically cut out the entire like 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20 season brochure language or summary language and just dropped it in there. And I was like, that's not a good use. And if we're going to exponentially expand up to 5 pages, I, as a grant panelist, don't want to read that. What I want to read is if they had a great concert that they felt really great about, highlight that. Give us a, if they can, an example of that audio or visual, or at least a picture of it, or talk about it. But I don't need to. I don't definitely need to see it.
And I think like if they want to call out how what I want to see in that part of the narrative is how their artistic programming ties into broader organizational goals. So like we can read a season brochure and see sort of how they've laid out what they're going to do. But if they say they've established a goal to diversify their audience, can you point to what you're doing artistically to do that? If you say you're trying to expand into a new market, can you point to performing somewhere else or putting something new on your program? If you want to do more new music, can you show us, where in your programming you've commissioned work or doing something by living composers? Just like tie it back to a bigger narrative about your strategic goals, rather than just like Brandon and Jillian were talking about a laundry list of everything you've done, which is, I mean, I get it, particularly for organizations like community orchestras that do 3 or 4 programs. That's an easy thing to sort of list. But it doesn't help a lot.
Thank you. Hey, I've just lost track. I thought I saw someone who hasn't spoken unmute, but I have made a note and now I've lost track completely. Lori.
Yeah, so this was my first time doing grant reviews with you. I've done them with other organizations. Just a couple of things I noticed directly tied to what everyone else has been sharing. When you've got all of the materials plus the place to capture your comments open on a screen, you're already limited in landscape to toggle between all of the things. And what I found myself doing, right, wrong, or otherwise, is literally pulling out statements they made that aligned with what the metrics were. But in those ones that got very wordy, that process could take 10 to 15 minutes just to find the heart of what I was really trying to find. And so interestingly, the one where the person put the questions actually in the narrative was one of the easiest ones to process because it was super clear and there was no clutter. So I toggle between those two things. Is yes, there was some rich information, but when you're reviewing so many of these, getting to the heart of what are we holding them accountable to and what is supplemental information that reinforces those ideas. So even from the reviewer standpoint, some of that cut and paste is still in my comment boxes because it became part of my comments, if that's making sense. So either having two boxes, one to do the construct and then to make a few additional comments might make your job easier on the back end, but it was just a technical part. But I think if you clean up what everyone's talking about, then that issue I'm describing goes away. Because some of them were just really hard to sort through, I guess. Then tied to that, some of the supplemental material was like critical. Like one of the pieces that was critical is budget, right? Like looking deeply at the budget and what had happened with the budget, and that was a really important component of one of the sections. But then a lot of their supporting information didn't necessarily go there. So that's another one where we were chasing around all over. So I also just wonder about if budget is a critical piece, and to the point about maybe even forecasting the next budget, to me that part is important to just get really clear on what we want to see and put maybe a little bit more language in there. There were the ones that intuitively sort of knew, and then there were others that probably are newer to grant writing who just really didn't. And so we were left to speculate what the numbers meant, and there just wasn't enough information.
So I will probably need to follow up with you on that a little bit, because I would love to make this clearer for everyone, for applicants as well as panelists. And I'm not sure how to convey what you just said in terms of, the pieces that aren't always clear, but that are sometimes clear. So to take maybe, I don't know if it would be helpful if I asked you to walk me through a budget, or I'm really not sure how to wrap my head around that one right now.
Well, I think it could be, and I'm happy to meet with you on that. I think my idea just is what do we want the budget to convey, and then having that articulated as a make sure your budget includes X, Y, and Z.
Oh, awesome.
If those are the things we're impressed when it happens, but then for someone who didn't do it, is it that they may not have known they needed to?
Yeah.
I feel like we talk about financials like in every one of these wrap ups, and I mean, you obviously know more about this, Karen, but I feel like there's a tension between like what's reasonable to ask of the organizations to get us what feels like comparable data points, and what's easy for them to provide. Because I know, like Lori, I thought there were a handful of organizations that did a really good job with the financial narrative part. But then others that didn't. And it's hard to tease out particularly revenue from the 990 or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe it is just moving the financial piece to the narrative, like making it part of the narrative. I think it's easy, having done these sort of things in the state of Illinois and stuff, like when it's give us your budget numbers and then explain differences, it's super easy to skip over that and be like, we don't need to, like, we could sort of like, there's not any big differences. If you move it to the narrative and say like, explain what your major sources of revenue are, explain what your major expenses are, it still gives them the freedom to talk about what's important to them, but maybe gets them to address it a little more directly.
Okay. And maybe that is, are you finding that true for small budget organizations as well as mid-size, as well as large, or mostly the mid-size, or mostly the large?
That's a good question. I think probably the mid-sized are where I noticed it the most. They're large enough to have fairly complicated budgets. But places like Milwaukee and Madison orchestras are probably a little more savvy about grant writing. They've got, they're employing people that whose sole job is writing foundation and government proposals. So.
Brandon, I think you unmuted on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would like to see, again, you talked about the in-kind, which we addressed. I mean, from the revenue side, I would just like to simply know, what's earned, unearned, unearned, contributed, if there's an endowment draw and everything else, and then in kind. So simply just grouping it by that, and then expenses, what's overhead versus programmatic, and just leave it at that. I mean, we don't have to get details of education or everything else, but at least in terms of revenue, I can definitely see, again, some people, we went into the 990s and looked at, okay, great, it looks like contributed revenue for several of the smaller organizations continued to grow or stabilized. And that was wonderful. But some of the ones who couldn't provide 990s, and some of the other larger, again, mid-sized organizations to, sort of suss out, again, on a 3-year cycle where things are at in a really concise form, and then also providing a prediction for the next year. Because if I see that an organization has continuously lost ground on earned income and isn't, and is just making it up on guesses for, let's say, the next year on unearned, on contributions, I might be a little worried. But again, if they have a large endowment and able to help bolster that provides at least more confidence in the organization, and at least able to then, over the last couple of years, you can address that in the narrative and saying, okay, we've seen this decrease in earned, this is exactly why, and here's how we're combating it.
So I appreciate you bringing that idea up again. This is the perfect group to ask the question of. One of the things that we designed into this program, again, based on Pennsylvania and the way they approach this, is in 28 or whenever, we realized, having looked back at a number of general operating support applications and even projects, we're asking people to look in their crystal ball. No matter how beautifully designed their crystal ball is, what is your next year going to look like? And particularly in a pandemic time. Right, this is remarkably challenging. And so we made the decision back then to say, we're not going to ask you to do that anymore. We're not going to ask you to project, because you can make a projection look really beautiful or really frightening or whatever, but it's projection. We're asking you to give us the hard facts, which is, this is what we did. This is what we had. This is how we're thinking about addressing some of the challenges going forward. But in terms of financials, you can take a look at our last 3 years and make a pretty educated guess about where we're going to continue, unless we say something dramatic within our narrative. So that's how we've been approaching it to now. And so this is a great opportunity for me to check in with you guys and say, does that still make sense? Or from your perspective as panelists, is it fundamentally important to your review of an organization to be able to see financially where they are projecting over the next year?
In what you said, I want to make sure we're calibrated on why we care about the budget, because if we care more about fiduciary responsibility and about good stewards of grant dollars, then we might ask the questions different. If that's ultimately what we're looking for, is, are they going to be a good steward of grant dollars, giving grant dollars? What's the risk of offering a grant to someone? If it's to analyze their structures and way of thinking and give them feedback on that, then I would ask different questions, right? So when you have us look deeply at the budget, I'm assuming it's a little bit of both, right? It's both, what's the risk of investing in this nonprofit, and what is what is, you know, their risk as a nonprofit in staying viable?
So that's a great question. And the reason that we ask that question is rarely, especially in this program, you know, are you a risk for taxpayer dollars? I mean, you get that from so many different parts of the application. The budget is not necessarily the teller. On the other hand, this is a best practice grant. So this is one that encourages best practices. So by the questions that we ask, what we're trying to convey not only is, you know, please give us your answers to this, but hey, this is the generally understood best practice or standard in this particular area. And so, and that's another thing that we need to look at, especially as we look at the range of applications that we're trying to encourage to come to us, but that's a separate conversation. So, so I would say, Lori, it is a mix, but it's more, this is the standard. Is this organization fully realizing its, you know, best practices in terms of organizational sustainability and capacity and all of that? Does that make any sense?
It does. And then is it to turn around and educate them and provide support, or make them aware that they have something they need to attend to? I think that changes maybe how you approach asking the questions.
So are you saying that it would be helpful to know what's coming up in the next year, or you're fine knowing what they have done up until now?
I actually concur that it would be helpful to at least know, like taking a real pandemic situation I may or may not be familiar with right now. There are knowns and there are unknowns. But with the unknowns, if you're going to go ahead and take the risk, you have to know when you pull back. Like what is going to be the trigger to pull back, and then what and how do you do that? Is it to reduce your staff? Is it to reduce other expenses? Is it to cut a program? Instead of just going full bore ahead because you said you were going to in the budget, and then you get more information. So it's really the new checks and balances I think we all have to put in place, that where there are those unknowns, there has to be a check and balance at certain points to ensure that an organization doesn't get in so deep and continue the cycle moving forward as we figure out what is the new normal, what is the new earned revenue. We don't know yet, right? And so we can't count on it, but we have to know if we're going to go ahead and take risks with things, where do we put other things up to, you know, be the stopgap at that point.
And you would like to see that in sort of a budget form, not only in the narrative, but just kind of as you look forward. Okay.
Well, it would seem for the next couple of years anyway, it might be a good question that everybody's asking themselves. And some of these organizations that have surpluses now are going into this year pretty confident, but after about 2 more cycles through no earned revenue, if they don't resolve other issues, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And I would say that of the conversations that I have had, very few people it's that balance of confident is not the word that I would use. Only because there's all of this money from PPP, EIDL, emergency rescue, all that stuff. And that's actually backfilling. That's not like a little nest egg that we can spend over the next little while. And so communicating that to donors, to community leaders, to legislators, to funders is an ongoing challenge. I want to just step back for a minute and just see, does anybody else have any thoughts about budget stuff? Because I'm a geek on this stuff, and I could use you all afternoon, and you put in a heck of a day already, so I don't want to do that. But any other thoughts related to this particular topic at the moment? Okay. And what I heard earlier is that you don't feel like you want to see 5 pages from small budget organizations. You're comfortable and confident at 3. What do you think about the midsize? Should we ask them to put it all in 3 pages too? Or do you feel like 5 is a good amount for them? Should we keep it as is? And if you don't have any strong feelings, then that tells me that it's working pretty okay, which is fine. Okay.
Again, I would point out that beginning the mid-size and going to the large, there was a lot of talk about EDI and diversity initiatives. So if it's really important for the State Arts Board to know about this and have a discussion, then pull that into a separate question and include that. Because again, I think that I'd be fine reading the same amount of pages, but I think there were so many times when that was referenced in the 4 questions that if it's just really important, let's just address it as a 5th question or even something else.
Good, thank you. Great. How about, as you look back over the 22 that we talked about today first, was there anything that surprised you? Any trends? Any best practices, any, responses for how people have responded to the pandemic? Anything that was surprising? Anything that was reassuring?
I don't know if this was quite answering your question, but I found this go around harder to judge than in the past. And I guess that should have been obvious to me going in maybe, but those couple of years of responding to COVID made it really hard to judge everything from what sort of programming they do to what their budget looks like. Like I felt like everybody was sort of mushed together and it was harder to sort of pull out who was doing really well and who wasn't doing really well. I think it made it hard for organizations to respond to the questions. I don't know if there's anything that could have been done about that to sort of balance what we used to do with what we're doing now, with what we plan to do. They struggled with it. Something I noticed, I don't know if other folks, is there a limit on how much space they can use for their organizational history on the first?
Their organizational what?
Their history. Because there were some organizations that were like dumping a tremendous amount of information in their history session. And I like give them credit for like
strategically using the tool.
Yeah, using it wherever they could. But there were some that were like talking about their current year's programming in that section.
That's a really awesome thing for us to look at. I don't believe there is a limit, and I think that your comment is encouraging me to consider that.
Yeah, no, it might be a good idea.
Thank you. All righty. Other things that came up that you wanted to make sure we talked about at the end here, anything that caught your attention?
I guess oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to concur with Kevin. And again, I never know if this is because I'm new to this and I had to kind of you calibrate the first time you do something to find if your thinking is aligned. But the first of the 4 numeric numbers, because of COVID, I found myself not being able to give people much more. Like I was pretty standard in what I gave across because it was in the other areas that I felt like I could really differentiate. But it feels hard with the pandemic to judge what people decided to do. Like whether you did or you didn't and what you did and how you chose to survive, it just feels like that's a really hard place because of what the metrics were in that first box. Whereas when I got to the other boxes, I felt like I could really differentiate more. But maybe that was just me, and I think that's one of the boxes I struggled a little bit with. But I think it was directly tied to my feelings about just seeing all the resilience across all these arts organizations and what they did once they realized they couldn't do what they normally do.
And how they responded to their communities and their community engaged, etc. Yeah, Jillian.
No, I completely agree. You were not alone, because I think the last time around I was a much harder scorer than I was this time. And I think even before coming into this meeting, I'll admit, like, because I had kind of jotted down some of my scores on some of the applications, and then Karen, you sent us that email about extending grace. And so then I looked back at my scores and was like, am I being too hard on this? And so, because again, it is very subjective to the organization, what they were able to do. I mean, some had, some of them could do the technology to move online. Others were just like, we don't have that technology, so we're going to meet outside and we're going to have our performance. I mean, so it was very subjective and just kind of like, but again, everyone was resilient. Everyone found a way to connect in some way. Whether it was one performance that they, I think, and the one example I'm thinking of, I think it was a recording from 2018 that they put out, that it was just like, it wasn't a recent recording. It was just like, we have this and we're going to give you this as a placeholder until we are able to come back. And so, yeah. But yeah, the other sections, the other 3 areas were a little bit more like, okay, I can pick this apart a little bit more this go around. So yeah, I mean, I was happy to see when we put up kind of like where we all scored, that we all seemed to be generally in the same area for most of the applications. There were only a couple that I saw that kind of was like, oh, I scored that vastly different than some of the other people on the panel.
Yeah, I would encourage us to consider whether or not the 22 that we talked about today specifically, I mean, when we talked about extending grace, these are organizations that have moved through this time, and there are others that didn't choose to apply that have done this, I think, as well. But we have amazing music organizations in this state, bottom line. So not a huge surprise if you found yourself going, well, I think they did great. It's hard to pull that out. Then don't, just celebrate that and score it the way you did. I think that that's perfectly acceptable. And there is a lot to celebrate. And we're not done. Everybody knows we're not done. We've got another few years to find our footing. And I don't, we'll see where that leads us. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Anything as you are, I am mindful of the time and mindful that I tend to be greedy in these moments. So I'm trying to pull back a little bit, but I do want to ask, was there anything in this process, in the application, in the guidelines, in the applications that you reviewed, in the day, whatever, that made you think, I am really glad that I said yes to this, or I'm really sad that I said yes to this? Which pieces caught your attention and said, oh, this has got to change if I'm ever going to do this again, or, this really needs to change for the good of the field. And wow, this is kind of awesome. I'm really glad that I put time into this.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Karen, for being so accommodating, especially since I was your problem child. I got a late start and then I'm going to have a late finish, but I appreciate all your help. And, it was very, very gratifying to, especially since I've been gone from Wisconsin for 2 years, to see how some of these organizations have changed since whenever it was 4 years ago, have changed and improved and are farther along on their strategic goals. And so I love that. So thank you for all you do for them.
Sure. Thank you. And Emily, I have 2 teenage girls. You're not a problem child. I said that out loud. I adore my teenage girls. They're awesome and they're totally worth it. Other thoughts? Kevin had to leave to pick up his awesome child. Yeah, Jillian.
Well, I had some confusion as to the 22 that we were scoring and the 22 that we weren't, and kind of.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
Yeah, because like I was kind of like, okay, am I scoring
those? Yeah.
Yeah, am I scoring these now? Am I scoring them later? And what comments I put in? Because again, it was like, am I going to get this back in order to do editing, or is this it? Like I've scored, it's gone, and I never.
So a little more clarity and orientation on those. Yeah, that was an experiment for us. Thank you for bringing that up. And that is, given the budget that we have right now, as frustrating as this is for me to say, I've certainly said it before, and I hope not to say it again for too much longer, but these are organizations based on the number of applications that we get that are strong, based on the amount of funding that we have. These are organizations that will get about $2,000. They're not going to get more unless you score them so low that you're saying they're not ready for a grant from this program at this time, in which case we take them out of the mix. But discussion wouldn't change that, and discussion, no matter how highly you scored them or how low you scored them, wouldn't change the fact that they're going to get $2,000. And so it is an honoring of your time and an honoring of theirs, that they put in a lot of time for these applications, And so they deserve the commentary that you have, any constructive criticism that you have, any kudos that you have to share, because they can take those kudos and take them literally to the bank in some cases. And they can also take those pieces of constructive criticism and say, okay, this is what we could do to strengthen if we had the capacity and the resources. We have had 5 people who are really strong spend some time with this application. And so, their comments are gifts that we can consider moving forward. But because a 44 application day would have taken us on Zoom until much later in the day. And it was hard enough, it felt like, just to have this chunk of time via Zoom, although, again, I'm a geek and it kind of went fast for me. But that's why we chose to do it the way we did. And I would ask you all for your feedback on whether that made sense, whether that was a good approach, or whether there's a better way for us to handle that moving forward.
I think just a little bit more, just a little bit of clarity of, okay, these are the 22 that we're not going to discuss, but your comments, and you need to score them by this date, this time, so that those are already done. Because I don't think yesterday when I looked, the box for scoring was there.
And you had submitted them?
Yes. And so I think
here, it wasn't available. So I just went through it while we were talking.
Yeah. So I mean, so I'm scoring them now because I know. So, but again, I was just kind of like, if that could be maybe separated a little bit.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you followed the instructions, which said, please submit them by noon yesterday. And then you didn't. And then when you got them again, they didn't have. Then when you went into them again, they didn't have the scoring line for you to use to score?
Not until this morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which means mine all have a number in the comment box yesterday, because I was so confused. I'm like, where does this number go? So I put them in parentheses in the boxes, but I didn't do the final submission. So I can just go through and move the numbers now, but yeah.
Please do that. And I'm sure that that's me not having communicated with Dale about how Smart Simple works. I am quite positive that that's.
I worked all day. Yeah, I worked all day yesterday, and it was there. I'm not finished yet because of some extenuating circumstances, but yesterday they were all there. I started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they were.
So you had the scoring boxes.
Yeah. No, I didn't have any problem at all. I scored and I submitted.
Dale, do you have any idea what the mystery here might be?
We have that box there that says you know that it's the day of the panel meeting. Remember, everything was geared on, you couldn't submit a final score until the panel meeting.
Except Emily did.
But did some check that box and some not, is what I'm curious about.
Check what box?
There's a box that says,
Caitlin or I within Smart Simple?
No, there's a box on the panelist sheet that says you certify that you are doing this on the day of the panel meeting or something to that effect. I wonder if that reveals the boxes.
So all of this tells me, panelists, that we just need to do a little more. I need to do a little more work on my end with Dale to figure that piece out. So I apologize that the scoring wasn't available to you. yesterday. And if you did make a note of what scores you were planning on putting in there, please go ahead and put them in. They should be there now. They should be available now, yeah?
Mhm.
Okay.
I
My
wonder,
apologies. Yeah,
too,
Kate.
Jillian and Lori, was it just for those 22 organizations that we didn't discuss today? It was the ones you were just adding the comments on, or was it for all of them?
Well, I wasn't aware of the box till this morning. That's why I asked that question way early today, because I couldn't figure out where the scores were supposed to go. Yesterday, I didn't notice the line nor the checkbox at the bottom. The first time I saw that was this morning. So I did all of the small ones, but they're sitting in that like initial draft or right before you hit final. So I'll just put them in those lines and send. I can do that as soon as we're off the call, but something I think didn't work technically because I never saw that.
Interesting, because you only see those score boxes once the initial review has been submitted, where there is no comment, there's no comment or there's no numerical score option. Once you then go back to your home screen, it should say that they go from pending to, I think, initial review status, and then it's that final review where you have the numerical score boxes. But I'm not sure what happened there. So thanks for just calling it to our attention.
Yeah, and if we choose to do it this way again, that tells me that it will be checking in with the panelists on that day or before that day and saying, hey, are you seeing this? So, okay, yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Other thoughts about anything at all related to this? Susan, go ahead, Lori.
I was just going to say I absolutely had no time to do this. I mean, when I said yes, I really did not have the time. And I am so grateful that I took the time I didn't have and did this. Because it fed a part of me. Like, I think what it reminded me of, because I'm executive director of a arts organization here in the state that has been through a lot, and you hear snippets about what people did, but we've been so disconnected from one another. To read the stories of organizations that I know of and have respect for just gave me such great resolve to go back out and slay more dragons and keep up the good fight, because we don't necessarily know what we all are doing, and it also makes me wonder, how do we better tell our collective Wisconsin story, because it's pretty impressive. Really impressive.
And I'd love to keep that conversation going. Brandon, you had unmuted for something, and then Susan, I'd love your take as panel chair on this too. Brandon? Yeah?
Again, it was a busy time for me as well. We're preparing for our next concert this weekend. So no, I think that everything was great. I think, again, what emerged for me, there's a lot of questions about EDI that a lot of people are doing, and I think that's a great consideration for the future. I think the only operational thing for me is to better organize some of the audio and visual stuff. Sometimes it was hard to pull out a clip or a link and everything else, and either creating, once they fill it in, either create like a bit.ly or something else that we could really just connect to, or even have a universal place for it to be stored. That was the only issue. Sometimes I was like, oh, do I need to like type it in manually and everything else? But again, a lot of great stories, a lot of really wonderful organizations, a lot of choirs. I did not know how many choirs and choral activities are happening in Wisconsin. Yeah, certainly, this is a great time. Thank you.
Did you say you had to type in some information to access work samples?
Sometimes I had to, just take a copy of the link. I couldn't directly click on the link. Sometimes it wasn't hyperlinked, so I had to like take a copy of it.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, helpful. Yeah, Susan.
Okay, I just want to tell you, as a Wisconsin Arts Board member, I had no idea of the amount of work that went into every one of these. You guys are amazing. you rock. You are just, I mean, you could never have chosen a better crew, Karen. You got a great crew of panelists who absolutely worked crazily. And it's really, sorry, you have 1 minute left, less than 1 minute left. Now I'm trying to stop and it won't.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you for taking the
Okay.
time to.
But thank you. And I'd like to talk to you offline about some of these things. I just think that as a panel, you are absolutely amazing. And the amount of work, it was so obvious to me what a huge amount of work this was. And thank you very much. And I'll make sure that the rest of the board hears about that.
Thank you all from me as well. It is 3:14 and you have earned a release. But on behalf of the applicants who put in so many hours into each of these applications, thank you for giving them the attention that they deserved. It's awesome. So on that note, if there are no other words to be said here, we will say thank you again, goodbye, and I'll be in contact via email for sure. Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah.